Dave Kathka indicated that Tamsin Hurt is willingly serving dessert. Anyone who wants to be served by the president of the Wyoming State Historical Society? So thanks again for coming. That was a delicious dinner, and the catering staff at UW does a fantastic job in this beautiful facility in the Gateway Center. So what a delight it is to eat in such a good place. The American Heritage Center, the institution we're here to celebrate and to which we all devote so much, is primarily dedicated to a mission of history, collecting significant historical archives and photographs, managing these collections professionally and making them available to researchers and scholars in the pursuit and their achievement of their scholarly goals. So in keeping with this theme of history, tonight's event is certainly a historic occasion in the life of the AHC as we gather to celebrate the 13-year career of a remarkable individual, our director, Mark Greene. Under Mark Greene's leadership, the American Heritage Center has advanced substantially in its professionalism, in its operation. It has been recognized nationally as a leader among U.S. archival institutions. Many faculty members have enjoyed meaningful careers at the American Heritage Center since Mark Greene began his work in 2002 and hired most of those who are working today. The amount of the center's collections has grown significantly, and their digital online availability has increased exponentially, all to the ultimate benefit of the users of the materials at our AHC. So Mark, we volunteer board members salute you, and through our many interactions with you, we have learned firsthand over the last dozen years of your intense personal dedication to the success and the excellence of the American Heritage Center. Your passion for this center at the University of Wyoming has made it a pleasure and very personally fulfilling for each of us as board members to be part of an organization which has continually grown and gained ever greater professional stature. So we sincerely want you to know that your total personal and intellectual commitment to the advancement of the American Heritage Center and to the fulfillment of its mission has been highly motivational to those of us who serve you as Board of Advisor Directors. I was trying to think of just a quick phrase to capsulize Mark Greene, and I thought that literacy in combination with sincerity creates a very powerful force. No one exemplifies this combination more than Mark Greene. I feel very certain that everyone in this room has received one and probably many personal letters from Mark Greene. A Mark Greene letter is a literary masterpiece. It is personal, it is interesting, it is descriptive and on topic. It is a complete lesson in the proper use of punctuation, especially the comma, which is your closest companion. Often a bit verbose, but it is always expressive of Mark's genuine sincerity for the message he is trying to convey to his reader. Mark, you are a masterful writer, and you have earned the respect and esteem of your colleagues, your employees, and the donors through a combination of hundreds of letters, each one personally crafted by you, one at a time. Similarly, you have gained substantial professional standing in the archival community, and you have brought increased reputation and excellence to the American Heritage Center by a combination of dozens of academic journal articles and other professional writings that you have done in support of this institution over the past 13 years. For your talent and your ability as a communicator and the success that it has brought To you personally and to this institution, we highly commend you and thank you. So now I would like to introduce our very special guest, Dr. Peter Blodgett. Peter Blodgett is a New Englander by birth and upbringing. Dr. Blodgett received his bachelor's degree in American history from Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine. He earned a master's degree and a PhD doctoral degree at Yale University. Later in his career, he joined the Huntington Library's manuscripts department in 1985, and he has been responsible for the acquisition, processing, exhibition, and reference service at the Huntington Library's Rare Original Documents Division, documents concerning the history of the Trans-Mississippi West over the past 2 centuries. Dr. Blodgett is active in a variety of professional organizations, including the Society of California Archivists, the Society of American Archivists, and the Western History Association. Dr. Blodgett has spoken and written widely on national parks, tourism, and recreation, as well as the management of manuscripts and archives dealing with those topics. Among his publications are Monitoring West, Volume 1, Automobile Pioneers from 1900 to 1909, Worlds of Wonder and Ambition, The Gold Rush in California and the Culture of Mining Bonanzas in the North American West, Defining Uncle Sam's Playgrounds, Railroad Advertising in the National Parks in the period 1917 to 1941. Dr. Blodgett currently holds the position of the H. Russell Smith Foundation Curator of Western Historical Manuscripts at the Huntington Library. So, Dr. Blodgett.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and let me first express my pleasure in the opportunity I have, a unique opportunity I have to be here to take part in the celebration of the career of my good friend, longstanding colleague, Mark Greene. Mark and I have known each other for a lot longer than I suspect either of us would probably want to go into at depth, but it has been a fascinating acquaintanceship professionally. I've certainly gotten a lot more out of it than Mark has, but he's always been very generous, as he is with all of his friends and acquaintances, in terms of sharing his professional knowledge, his skills, his commitment to the field. So it's my great pleasure to be here from California this evening. And if any of you happen to see me at the end of the evening going around and emptying any of those carafes of water into my jacket, it's just a little something I need to be doing as a Californian to make sure that I help refresh our rather depleted supplies of moisture. So pay no attention. I'm just doing what all of us are going to have to be doing from now on. You haven't seen anything about this yet. This is the memo that just came out from Governor Jerry Brown to all of us Californians who are planning to travel. Audentes fortuna luvat. Fortune favors the bold would seem the indispensable motto for anyone who takes up the challenge of overhauling the character and culture of any institution, particularly one so entangled with the legacy of that acquisitional juggernaut, Gene Gressley. And yet, while no one who knows him would suggest that Mark Greene lacked for audacity, I believe that Mark's success at the American Heritage Center over the past dozen years exemplifies instead Louis Pasteur's dictum that fortune favors the prepared mind. Personally, I know of no mind that would have been better prepared for this endeavor than that possessed by tonight's guest of honor. However uncertain I may be that Wordsworth's phrase, "the child is the father of the man," might apply to each and every one of us, I must concede at once that Mark's intellectual trajectory testifies to its validity in his case. A 1980 summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Ripon College, with a double major no less, he continued to acquire academic credentials at the University of Michigan in 1984 with a master's in American history, cognates in archival administration and modern Chinese history, and the Preston Slauson Prize Fellowship to his credit. Having thus nearly exhausted the Regent's stockpile of academic honors and degrees, he pivoted into the workplace as Carleton College's archivist in 1985, launching a career that over the following 30 years would accumulate distinctions as rose bushes attract honeybees. The course of that career is familiar, at least in its outlines, to all present here this evening. Curator of manuscript acquisitions at the Minnesota Historical Society, head of research center programs at the Henry Ford, and finally director of the American Heritage Center, beginning in 2002. That impressive progression has been mirrored throughout the decades by his unwavering commitment to and his steady advance through the ranks of the archival profession on the regional and national levels, culminating with his election as a Fellow of the Society of American Archivists in 2002, the highest honor we can offer to anyone, and then as president of SAA 5 years later. Wherever they have occurred, such successes have shared one especially salient trait. No matter the setting, Mark has not merely accepted the challenges of the moment, he has set out in search of them, like an archival St. George vanquishing dragon after dragon. And like St. George's lance, Mark too has wielded a fearsome weapon, an intellect honed to razor sharpness. Now, I would be the first to admit that I am not the first to divine this quality in Director Greene. As his good friend and former MHS colleague, Dennis Meisner, astutely observed in 2008, intellectually speaking, Mark gets around a lot. At the archival buffet table, he's a decided omnivore. I would, however, elaborate upon Dennis's comment to assert that, like Gall in Caesar's commentaries, Mark's capacious intelligence may be divided into 3 parts, all of which I've seen fully deployed during the years. Perhaps the most familiar member of the triad would be Mark Greene, the persistent provocateur. Throughout his career, Mark has prodded all of us in the profession to rethink our customary behaviors, to re-examine familiar assumptions, and to overturn conventional wisdom when he finds the customary, the familiar, and the conventional serving only to hinder our labors, warning us with his characteristic insight and dry wit to avoid such pitfalls as accepting, quote, moderation in everything and access in nothing, close quote, in managing issues related to privacy. He has repeatedly admonished us to never eat anything bigger than your head in acquiring modern papers, to avoid confusing the bun with the burger in dealing with context and content, and, if necessary, to dance with the family skeletons if we can't get rid of them in managing problematic decisions made by our predecessors. He has urged us to strengthen our identity while fighting our foibles, to grasp the power inherent in our archival profession, and, above all, to engage forthrightly in what he's accurately called the messy business of remembering, something that actually came to mind this afternoon during the fascinating symposium, listening to some other people speaking about memory and history, and I've never read a more intriguing parsing of those two circumstances than the essay that Mark Greene published. He has, in short, repeatedly issued calls to arms for us both to do better and to be better for the good of ourselves, for the good of our profession, and for the common good of the wider society in which we must, as archivists, play so important a role. Mark's keen eye in ferreting out sloppy thinking, unexamined assumptions, or, to paraphrase Ralph Waldo Emerson's celebrated observation, foolish consistencies that become the hobgoblin of little minds, coupled with his astringent evaluations in print of such failings, has probably inspired more Maalox moments within the archival profession than any other phenomenon since the first roll of Scotch tape was deployed to repair great-grandpappy's Overland diary. Unlike the professional gadfly or scold, however, Mark has never been satisfied merely to diagnose a problem and harp incessantly upon its existence. Well, almost never. Time and again, Mark has demonstrated a capacity for intriguing innovation pursued with single-minded zeal. The most celebrated achievement, of course, has been more product, less process, an apogee of the Greene-Meisner collaboration, over which more ink has been spilled by the archival profession in the last decade than over any other topic in living memory. Long before Greene-Meisner was a glint in either co-author's eye, though, Mark envisioned new and improved tools and methods with which to arm the stout-hearted archivist. The Minnesota method to direct the pragmatic selection of the records of American business. Reappraisal and deaccessioning as means to control the challenges of collecting contemporary archives, and reorganizing operations in tough times to keep the rough patches from getting even rougher. His talent for innovation has routinely included a remarkable ability to identify opportunity in the midst of obstacles and then snatch it before it devolves into chaos. From advocating the classroom potential of college and university archives to determining how to make sense of the records of small businesses, Mark has campaigned tirelessly to improve how we choose the pieces of the past to be saved, how we make sense of organizing them for our users, and how we reach the widest possible audiences with the fruits of our labors. Mark's continuing embrace of opportunities to improve how we do our work, how we think about our jobs, and how we contribute to society in general certainly reflects not only a keen but a restless intellect, one that is never satisfied by resorting to explanations such as we said at the table just a little while ago, but we've always done it that way. Throughout his career, however, he has proven to be a most paradoxical insurgent, driven far more by data than by dreams. His weapons have been SurveyMonkey and databases, not torches and dynamite. Reading through essays such as 5 Easy Pieces of a 5-Year Plan, From Village Smithy to Superior Vacuum Technology, or The Power of Archives, any expectations one might have about finding that the wizard behind the curtain is a wild-eyed visionary out to overturn the established order are quickly eradicated. Here is the orderly revolutionary, the third in the trio of Mark Greenes I mentioned earlier, who marshals his columns of evidence and dispatches them into battle while carpet bombing his adversaries into submission with the weight of his footnotes. coolly logical arguments unfold one after the other, shredding the opponent's defenses and rumbling forward to seize the intellectual high ground, while surviving defenders flee in terror. It is a sight to make civilians faint and strong archivists weep. The persistent provocateur, the insistent innovator, the orderly revolutionary. How can so many rumbustious characters be harnessed by one individual? Because guiding them all is a concept of how the consummate professional tackles the world, a concept that appears in one of his very first published endeavors, using college and university archives as instructional materials, a case study and an exhortation, which appeared in a 1989 issue of the Midwestern Archivist. Writing of his efforts to encourage use of the archives to support undergraduate education, Mark observes that one general strategy for success could be to, quote, go beyond the traditional. In those 4 words, I would assert, we discover the essence of what would characterize Mark Greene's thinking and his practice throughout his career. If your collections are underutilized, find new audiences for them. If your backlog is immense and insurmountable, reconsider the tools you use to appraise and process your collections. If you need to build more institutional support, demonstrate how the inherent power of your archive will help accomplish the institution's goals. And while understanding that failures happen, remember that success will breed success. So what, in looking at Mark Greene, the archivist, the individual, what has his presence meant to the AHC? I would say he has made it possible for the American Heritage Center to partake of one of the essential truths of life, which is that every generation must renew those institutions that it inherits from its predecessors, lest those institutions become moribund and in time fit only to be consigned to the dustbin of history. And I think it's only fair to say that the American Heritage Center, at the time of Mark's arrival, was ready for a thoroughgoing renewal. Now, appraising in depth the edifice that Jean Gressley would erect from the 1950s through the 1980s upon the foundation of the University Archives and Western History Collections founded in 1945 would require a far greater investment of time, energy, and space than this evening's festivities permit, nor would it be a task directly germane to my topic. It is, moreover, a story no doubt more familiar to most of you than to an outsider such as I. Suffice it to say that, in the course of 3 decades, Gressley would assemble a treasure house of archival materials truly pharaonic in scale, propelled by his omnivorous appetite for whatever he felt might document the course of American history. As we are reminded by the great Greek tragedians, however, even at the moment when hubris reaches its apogee, nemesis is often descending from the heavens to strike down overweening pride and ambition. In this case, the breathtaking pace of pursuing the ambition to collect all too frequently overshadowed every other archival task, piling up untold decades worth of labor that would be required to account for, arrange and describe, house, care for, and make available this staggering body of historical documentation. Such a willingness to write unlimited drafts upon the future finally brought about a reckoning that not only initiated Gressley's departure, but instituted new demands and priorities that would uproot an organizational culture while trying to inculcate another one in its place. As Sisyphean as such an endeavor might seem, ensuring the future of the American Heritage Center seemed to require nothing less. Fortunately, there wasn't a Hercules available to take on that labor. Of course, now we think about what would it mean to have had Mark here at this institution, devoting his time and effort to its renewal. Well, I would argue it's meant a number of things. The impact has been primarily, I would say, through the character of the leadership that he has provided. It's leadership that has concerned itself with the full range of the American Heritage Center's identity as a collections-based center for research and education. I've stolen that from the Huntington, but I'll send Mark a bill in the morning. It's leadership that has provided a fully articulated vision of the center's role as a premier repository of American history. It's leadership that is determined that this institution be intertwined with the most current professional knowledge and benefit fully from it in its application to all the tasks that the center must pursue. It's leadership, and this is particularly unusual, as many of us in the archival world would say that we know from bitter experience, that's been determined to invest in the potential of people, not merely in the potential of bricks and mortar. It's leadership determined to integrate the American Heritage Center fully into the life of the university and of the larger world of teaching and learning. And above all, it's leadership that has been willing to take bold action and make hard choices, something that, again, my friend, the Archival St. George, has been more than willing to suggest was the important thing to do. He has had the opportunity over the past dozen years to prove his truth by his endeavor. Now, what does the future hold for this paragon of archival achievement? Well, I'm reminded that historians are particularly poor in prognostication, but that's never stopped me before. So I think it's quite possible, given his, as I've mentioned before, restless intellect, that he may end up releasing his inner Thomas Alva Edison. And so I think that it would be a kindness if Rick were to alert the university's Department of Mechanical Engineering to beware. I fully expect that within less than a year, the first patent for personalized hovercraft with 24/7 uplinks to the SAA website, CNN, and the blog for the American Heritage Center will be rolling through the university's patent office. And I fully expect that we are going to be seeing him jetting about, sharing his wisdom in many settings. Actually, speaking once in all seriousness, though, let me say that throughout my career, it has been a constant that Mark Greene's voice has been both an essential and a compelling one. And it is a blessing for all of us in the profession to know that it will still be heard in the councils of our profession. Now, I look forward to seeing his activities continue and to inform the needs of our profession, though we need to be careful that we don't pursue the poor man constantly. Having already so egregiously ignored Mark Twain's advice that it's better to keep your mouth shut and be thought a fool than to open it and remove all doubt, let me go ahead and close now with some remarks drawing upon a topic that I think, given the American Heritage Center's collecting interests, may not be totally out of place. It's an anecdote I would draw from one of the greatest American films ever made, the 1943 adventure Casablanca. And I am reminded of a particular section of the film where the embittered adventurer Rick Blaine, having just come to grips with the fact that his lover, Ilse Lund, has suddenly reappeared in his life, is now confronted as well by the man that he thinks, mistakenly, as of course we learn later in the film, has supplanted Rick in the affections of Ilse. And that's the distinguished Czech resistance leader, Victor Laszlo. And as they all sit down, a precedent that is broken, as Captain Renault says, where Rick never sits with the guests. Mr. Laszlo says, "A most interesting cafe. I congratulate you." Rick responds, "Thanks, I congratulate you." Laszlo, "On what?" Rick, "On your work." Laszlo, "Thanks, I try." Rick, "We all try. You succeed."
After participating in this afternoon's symposium and now listening to Peter Blodgett, it seems like the takeaway to me is archivists and historians are the most fun people. Who would you rather have dinner with and go on vacation with than this group of people? Mark Greene has been blessed throughout his entire tenure as director of the American Heritage Center by the ability, knowledge, and dedication of his associate, our much revered and beloved associate director, Rick Ewig. Mark and Rick have worked in lockstep for more than a decade, and together they have been a most powerful force for the advancement of the American Heritage Center. As Mark's closest day-to-day colleague, Rick has now assembled a special PowerPoint tribute to Mark Greene. This is a slice of dessert, so please welcome Rick Ewig.
Well, good evening. And before I start with that PowerPoint, I first need to give great thanks to Dave Foreman and the American Heritage Center Board of Advisors. This is being sponsored by them, and without their great support, we may not be here tonight. So Dave and everybody on the board, thank you very much. Okay, what I'm going to do is there will be a part that will talk about Mark Greene, but I also want to fill in a little bit of history of the American Heritage Center. Some of you here have lived through some of that, I believe, but I want to give you a little bit of a historic tour through the Heritage Center. This will be a whirlwind tour, and so unless you know shorthand, you're not going to keep up if you're taking notes. But I think it's important. Peter has touched on the history slightly, and he did mention the name of Jean Gressly, so I guess I can as well. So we're going to start at the beginning. And of course, whenever you talk about the history of the American Heritage Center, you have to talk about Grace Raymond Hebard. She, of course, predates the American Heritage Center, but as we know, she was important in collecting Wyoming history, talking to pioneers, sometimes interpreting Wyoming history, but we love her nonetheless. And so, her papers at the Heritage Center somewhat formed the basis, the foundation of our many collections. And of course, when she passed away, her papers went to the library at the time. So we have to start with Grace. Then, of course, 1945 is when the American Heritage Center officially starts. And the first director is Lola Hampshire. You might have heard that name. And still in the library, so she gets it to be called, the center, University Archives and Western History Department of the University of Wyoming. So that's how it officially started. So that was 45. A few years later, now this is when we do get to Gene, 1956, Gene Gressley is hired as university archivist. And at the time, there were 284 collections. When Gene left the center, he claimed there were 13,000 collections, but in fact, only about 3,000 collections. And you can guess how Gene might have inflated that number a little bit. But Gene was a very active collector, as Peter mentioned. And so he really started to collect in Western history, range cattle industry, Western economic development, petroleum in the Rocky Mountain West. And so we get to the 1960s, and Gene expands it even more. Then we go to journalism, then we go to transportation, then we go to, of course, popular culture. And so Gene is really expanding, and so what comes up but a possible new building for the American Heritage Center? And so this one is rather interesting, isn't it? This, I believe, is what Gene had in mind. Of course, all of you being at the University of Wyoming know that we like our archives a little rounder and blacker. But if you look at the windows on each side, they form a W. Of course, that would stand for wind. So Gene is collecting, 1970s come up, and during Gene's time at this point, he is always able to keep up with the new collections that he's bringing in. And so a new collection comes in, he has some people who are able to do an item level list. And so we still have some of those active at the Heritage Center. But we get to the 1970s, and all of a sudden, Gene and his staff can't keep up with all the collections coming in. Of course, so much is coming in. As you know, Gene wrote thousands of letters every year. And so they get to the point where they're putting collections on shelves, but they don't really know where everything is. And I'll give you one personal example, and I'll do it quickly. When I was a graduate student here at the university, and I was doing my graduate work on Lester Hunt, and I knew that the Heritage Center had the Lester Hunt papers. And so this is just the old co-library, of course, at the time, and a new edition. And if you wanted to research at the Heritage Center, you go on the third floor, and they had a little table sitting outside the door, not very well lit, but that's where you would do most of your research. However, for the Lester Hunt papers and Joseph Amani papers and a few others, they were on the fourth floor. And so Emmett Chisholm, many of you remember Emmett Chisholm, would take me up to the fourth floor in the new edition of the library. And he would show me where the Lester Hunt boxes were on the shelves, and he would just say, okay, I'll come up later to check on you. And so I was up there most of the time by myself. And that's great for a graduate student wannabe historian. So that was a wonderful experience for me. But can you imagine that happening today at a professional archive? I don't think so. But at least I got to experience that side of it. So they're having a hard time keeping up. The 1980s come, and the staff know that they need to get a handle on the collections. And so they go ahead and buy a TRS-80 computer, and they begin to do a collection management system to try and get the collections under control. But the 1980s have a lot of tumult, as you might imagine. Questions, should Gene be director? Should Gene not be director? There are studies going on. I think Eric Sandine has been on a few of those studies. And so that was going on all the time when the staff was trying to determine what was going to happen. But fortunately, something very positive happened, and that is the university made a strong commitment to the American Heritage Center. And it's not working now. That is a building that would be shared by the American Heritage Center and the University of Wyoming Museum. And so the Board of Trustees selected Antoine Predock, architect from New Mexico, to design it. And so there is a 1986 drawing of the Centennial Complex done by Antoine Predock. And it didn't quite turn out that way. There isn't that big fire in the middle of the building anymore, fortunately. But so there was a commitment made, and so that, of course, made a big difference. And there you see another image of the model, and that's Antoine Predock. They are looking at the model of the American Heritage Center. Now, the move. It took us 2 full summers in 1993 and 1994 to move everything that was there in the building. Before the Centennial Complex, we were on 3rd and 5th floors of co-library, and we were in 2 off-site storage areas. But when we opened, we had a grand time. We even found somebody who could make a cone cake. Now, of course, I know that's not the cone, it's a mountain, really, but it looks like a cone to me. My son used to call the Heritage Center an upside-down ice cream cone. That's where that comes in. So we had a nice celebration for faculty and staff, and then, of course, we had a ribbon cutting. That is Terry Rourke, President Terry Rourke, on the left side, and Governor Mike Sullivan, of course, when the building opened. So you get some sense. Now you think, I'm sure pleased that means it's the end of my talk, right? Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you. We made that cake as a celebration of when we were done with that move, because that was really a difficult move. So, 1980s, unsure what's going to happen. Some staff were even asking if the Heritage Center was going to stay open. But with that commitment of the building, which opened in September 1993, it was confirmed that we would stay open. But we still had all kinds of issues. We had a huge backlog going back to the 1970s. We had started to catalog in the 90s, but not gotten very far. Our head of arrangement and description, the processing area, when she was asked, how long would it take for you to process all of your collections you have at the American Heritage Center? She said, 500 years. I think Mark has proved that wrong, unfortunately, because I would still hate to be here after 500 years. So, and then we also we knew that, and this is one thing that Mark really had to fight, and that is the American Heritage Center had a certain reputation, of course, and that is that we brought in things willy-nilly and we just put it on the shelf and we didn't take care of it. That lasted a long time, and without Mark and his reputation and his foresight and his hard work, I doubt we would have gotten beyond that like we have today. So that was a thing that Mark brought. And of course, we did some outreach. We knew we had to do outreach. And so what better way to bring Stan Lee and Spider-Man to the University of Wyoming. We have Stanley's papers, of course. And in 1994, we brought Stan Lee. And fortunately, he brought Spider-Man. So that was nice. And then in the late 90s, really just before Mark comes, we take on Wyoming History Day, which is a very positive thing for us. Very important outreach for us. So that's pre-Mark. So, but I want to go on to the next part of my talk, which is not really me talking, but there's one voice we have not yet heard.
I think my proudest achievement, that's a very difficult question to answer because of the bifurcated set of goals that the AHC has in a sense. And when I say bifurcated, I mean, on the one hand, changing and leading our profession, and on the other hand, making the world-class collections here more and more visible and more accessible to more and more people, both in the state of Wyoming and around the world. And I think that we have managed to succeed on both paths, such that within our profession, the HC is known now as one of the best repositories in the United States for the kind of work that it does. But we're also known now as one of the best repositories in the nation and possibly the world in terms of the kinds of work we do to help researchers, whether they're scholars or students in the 6th grade, use our materials. One of the proudest things in my tenure here are the emails that get forwarded to me occasionally from researchers of all stripes telling us that they've never received the kind of assistance, the knowledgeable and truly helpful assistance that they've received here. Yes, I want to thank the University of Wyoming for giving me the opportunity to do a job I've loved for nearly 13 years. And I'd like to thank the people I've worked with for making that job one that I could love. And I'd even like to thank all the researchers and friends and supporters of the AHC over the years for helping to make the institution everything that it could be. Without all of that support, we wouldn't have been able to achieve everything that we have achieved. I feel very grateful and humbled to have been able to be a part of this for as long as I have been.
Thank you, Rick. You are also a very powerful communicator. So Mark, in that moving visual tribute that was prepared by Rick, and obviously your associate thinks as highly of you as anyone in the room, in that special ending, you said many touching words of thanks. Now, it is our turn as board members, guests, and friends to say a few final words of thanks to you. Our thanks as a board is embodied in a gift. We were trying to decide what is the most appropriate gift we could give this incredible man that has given so much of himself to provide such a world-class institution. In consultation with Rick Ewing and Tyler Spear at the UW Foundation, our board members decided to establish a new endowment fund at the UW Foundation, and that fund is alive and going strong today, and it is known as the Mark Greene Excellence Fund. The word excellence we felt was most appropriate for the name of this fund, It is the primary objective that you held for the operation of the AHC during your time as director. So it is our vision that the earnings from this permanent endowment fund, which bears your name, will be used to support scholarships for students whose curriculum involves substantial use of the collections at the American Heritage Center. It will be used to fund professional development activities for the staff and the faculty of the AHC, and it will be used to finance the conduct of outreach programs of the American Heritage Center throughout the state of Wyoming. It is our intense goal that all of these activities of support will be made in consultation with you, and will also include whatever other expenditures are possible that you feel will enhance the excellence of the AHC. So it is our goal that this Mark Greene Excellence Fund will become a lasting legacy and a meaningful tribute to you, to Mark Greene, to continue the tradition of excellence that you have brought to the American Heritage Center during your time as director. So tonight, our board members are proud to announce that collectively, we have contributed $20,000 as the initial start of this fund, and that many other friends are standing by, and we expect this fund to exceed $100,000 before the end of this month. So with that, Mark, if you would like, I will give you the microphone. What sayest thou?
All I can say is
Mark, let me give you the microphone.
all I can say is thank you again. It's going to sound a little, maybe a lot corny, but the biggest gift all of you have given me is the last 12 years. I would give anything for it to have continued. I thank you for everything.
So that concludes our program. I really hope you've enjoyed being with us tonight. This is a special and memorable evening. This occasion has been videoed, so it will be available in digital media, only appropriate for an archival institution. And Dr. Blodgett, we're going to ask you to make a gift of your remarks to our archives as well, and we hope you'll agree to that. Those were outstanding. So thank you all. Please stay, enjoy each other's company, and have a safe trip home. Good night.